Nursery.
Hiya, it's Kareem from Keeper's Nursery, and today is Sunday the 15th of September 2024. I'm making a late video. I've been very busy, but this is all about chip budding. So right now, behind me I've got lots of my seedling apples. The tops have already been cut off because I've already actually done all the chip budding. I did it about 3 weeks ago, but I wasn't able to make a video then. I had sort of promised a few people I'd try and make that video, but it requires 2 people. As you can see, I'm not holding the camera. My friend Chris is helping. My wife's too busy to get involved anymore, unfortunately. So in here, all of these seedlings, there's about 600 seedlings which I raised from seed. So they've been growing this growing season. Most of them were up to about sort of 1.5 to 2 meters tall, which was pretty impressive stuff. I did have to water them a lot. Some of them are now dry because I've left them alone. Pan camera. Oh, I mean, it might be in shot. Hey, Chris. Chris is giving me no help with this. So I'm just going to show you what I did. So I think in some of the other videos I said I was going to use the tips of the trees because that's the least juvenile part of the tree. And if you do this, if you were to basically use the budwood, which looks very good at the bottom of the tree, so the budwood that you want, so each of these buds at these leaf nodes, there's a bud under each, and this one has actually grown out. And I did mention on one of my other videos, with seedling trees you actually get lots of branches coming out at each node. This one you can see completely, they're all going to be different. This one not so many. This one that I cut, only one of them has branched out, so you can't actually use that bud because it's already branched out. But these ones, you can see under there is a bud, and that bud is basically what you want to branch out and become the tree next year. This is very nice budwood. This basically is the type of budwood, the thickness of budwood that I like to use in the nursery when I'm actually chip budding the trees for the nursery, stock. Because it basically matches the thickness of the rootstock that I have. But as you can imagine, the top of these seedling trees is going to be much thinner. Now it just takes more skillful sort of knife work to use that type of wood. This wood has actually started to look like it's drying out. One of the reasons that, basically I cut the leaves off here so that immediately there isn't any extra moisture loss, but I'm going to chip bud these straight away anyway. This is what I generally do. I'll collect the budwood, or as we call it, signwood, on the day of chip budding. So I'd want to use the tip. Now, let's find one which was pretty realistic. Okay, so here's one. The thickness of this is not, I mean this was actually quite good. I was using much thinner stuff. Let me just cut the leaves off. So this is what you want to do if you're doing this at home. You cut off all the leaves. You don't obviously damage the, these have started growing since I cut the top off. So that's a sign of when you basically prune the top of a tree, the tree's response is to branch out. So the top 2 nodes have started to leaf out. This one, the top has. I imagine some of them more than the top 2 have. So basically, let's use this. That's a pretty good example. So right now we're going to go outside and we're going to chip bud this. Some people did ask what I'm doing with all these seedlings here. So basically, these seedlings here I have no purpose for anymore. So I'm just going to. I'm just going to put them on the bonfire in a bit. I'm just going to obviously reuse the peat if I can. I don't want to use too much peat anymore in the world because that's one of the RHS goals, not to use too much peat, not to waste peat. So, I'll take this outside now. Wink. And we're back. So, I also found this up in the barn. So that's more realistic as to what the top of a seedling tree looks like. It was a multi-stem tree basically. So if I was doing it with the top, as much as this is the least juvenile part of the tree, if I was to whip and tongue graft this in the winter, I might be able to actually keep the top and sort of somehow do a side graft lower down. I mean, that's still too thin to do a whip and tongue. But what I was basically doing was losing, I don't know, the top foot or so, because this section down here, the wood is thick enough to actually chip bud. This is the one that I had earlier in the video, which I kept, not the very thick one. If I was to, this is now behind me are the cordon trees, these are the mother trees. If I was actually collecting scion for grafting purposes, for basic nursery stock, you can see the difference in the actual thickness. This stuff looks really, really good. Yeah, I mean, look at the difference in thickness there. That is going to be, now I'll show you what the rootstocks look like. So this is probably I think these are M26 rootstocks. So if Chris, if you come in close, this is the thickness of the rootstock, which is very similar to the thickness of this new growth on the cordon tree, which is what I would use. These have already been grafted. You can see lower down where the tape still is, so these would have been grafted about a month ago. This is the one that I thought, okay, that's quite good actually. I can still get away with using this as well, and I'll show you how I do it. Hey, Chris, do you want to come around this side and I'll do it on this back again. So this was the medium size out of the three. I'll do the skinny one in a sec as well. So I'm just demonstrating how to chip bud now. So importantly, you need a knife. This is a very, very sharp knife. This is, I think it's a German knife by a company called Tina. You can use all these bits. These bits at the back are actually for bark grafting in the sort of springtime. Always sharpen your knife. I've not bothered to sharpen it today because I'm only doing one graft, and yeah, it doesn't really matter for the purposes of the video. The tape that I use is called Buddy tape, made by Aglis. Now, Buddy tape is a game changer basically. I'll show you what it looks like. So you get, it comes out in perforated strips. This is the largest of the many different sizes of Buddy tape. I just use the largest one now because sometimes rootstocks are very thick and you have to get this tape to go around the rootstock. You might be thinking, how does this tape go around the rootstock? Obviously it stretches and it sticks to itself and it degrades by itself, so you don't actually have to take the tape off after you finish. So that used to be a huge job in September. So out here there's about 7,000 rootstocks, and after 3 weeks or more of chip budding in the summer, I'd have to actually come back and cut the tape off each one and put it in a in a bag and throw that away basically, which was several days work on top of what I'd already done, because the old tape the old tape wouldn't actually stretch with the tree, whereas this tape comes off by itself. So if it doesn't stretch, it's going to strangle the tree. It does work very well. Many nurseries still use that. But I'll show you the benefits of this tape. This tape, it sticks to itself, so it stretches out. So you can stretch it out very, 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 very far. As I said, you don't need to clear it up afterwards. It breaks down by itself. It breaks down by sunlight. So if you're in a very hot country, this stuff breaks down quite quickly. We did have a batch one year which actually broke down after about a week in Britain, but that was an issue. We've not had an issue with them since, and I do trust this stuff. But it's important, obviously, to just double check. If your rootstock is quite thick, I'll show you how much you can stretch this stuff around. So basically, you put your thumb in there, and you wrap, 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 and it sticks to itself at the end. So that can go quite far. Some rootstocks will be much thicker than my thumb, so you can't go quite as far. When you do cherry rootstocks as well, sometimes you want to leave the graft exposed. So I'll show you how to do the cut now. And this is also one of the benefits of the tape. Most nurseries will actually have one chap or several chaps who do the chip budding. So they do their sole job is chip budding, and let's say they're going to do a whole row, let's say 500 or more trees, and it's all going to be Bramley or Cox or whatever. So they'll have a pile of scionwood and they'll just go through, and all they're doing is chip budding, chip budding, chip budding, chip budding. And then there'll be someone behind them, a couple of trees behind them, and their sole job is to tape and tape and tape. I've basically just incorporated that into the same job because, why not? If you can do them both, just do it yourself. It isn't hard, and I think most nurseries should actually focus on doing that rather than having separate people just to tape, because if you tape the tree immediately as opposed to waiting, a minute or so in the heat, your tree is more likely to succeed and grow. So you've got fresh sandwood, which helps. I would usually keep this tape in my mouth when I'm doing the cutting because I don't have 3 hands, but for the purposes of the video I'll keep talking and put it in my pocket. So you get your knife. You don't want to cut yourself. I don't want to go too much into the actual knife work, but I'll talk about it. If you are going to try this at home, obviously you need a nice sharp knife. Everyone knows in the kitchen a nice sharp knife is probably the one that you're not going to hurt yourself with. Blunt knives, you try and force too much and you cut yourself. I've done this maybe 100,000 times or more, so there's a spit further. Yeah, I'm not going to hurt myself, although I do occasionally, maybe once a year. So if you zoom in here, Chris, you'll see first thing to do is select a nice bud. So you want to make sure there's no damage. Thank you for the noise. You want to make sure there's no damage. Obviously these ones all look fine. That was the one which has grown already, so you don't use that one. Okay, so this one's nice and thick, so you do a nice cut down there, and all you're doing afterwards is you want to section, I guess, like the fingertip length or a bit more. Some places use shorter ones. The longer the section of the chip bud, the more likely it is to grow. So it's not a deep cut. There you go, that's a perfect cut right there. So now we're going to jump down. You want to make the exact same cut on the rootstock. So you put it up, you match it up next to it, you whack that in, bish bash bosh. Here comes the tape. So I'd have already taped this if it wasn't in my pocket. So it's not exposed for very long, it's not going to dry out. You tape that on, there you go, you have cloned a tree. So whatever this seedling was is now grafted, and I would usually do this on M9, or I did do them on M9. This, I'll be honest, the M26s look much better than the M9, so that's why I've used this as an example. I will cut this off in a sec so it doesn't actually grow. If you leave that alone, and this would have been done in August rather than September, if you leave that alone, that whole chip will fuse onto the rootstock, and in the spring you come along in March, in sort of late March, and I would actually just cut just above, so right on that line there, just above the bud, not the whole thing, you don't need the whole thing, just above the bud there, you cut it all off so the rootstock is completely bare. You lose all the leaves up here, and then that won't kill the tree. The roots are very strong, there's a lot of energy stored in here. The tree's response is to grow again. There will be some growth lower down, some of these nodes down here will come back to life. You might get some suckers, but this point, this will be the apical point of the tree, and that tip will grow probably up to sort of 5-6 feet maybe in a year. Typically it depends on how much sun and rain you have basically. But yeah, and that's how you produce a new tree. Now, why am I doing this with seedlings? Is because if I just leave the seedling alone and I was just growing those seedlings in pots and I planted those out, A, they're going to have very, very big roots because most seedlings will have sort of plus size roots. So you get a full size tree, which is quite nice, a very nice long-lived tree, but you're not going to see the fruit very soon. If I plant out 600, so I've got about 1,300 seedlings in the nursery. If I had 1,300 full-size trees growing out in the nursery, that would take up a heck of a lot of space because I wouldn't be able to plant them 35 centimeters apart. I have to plant them sort of 5 meters apart at least. They would grow very large. They wouldn't fruit for many, many years either, maybe 10 years. On these M9s, I reckon in the next sort of 3 or so years, I will start seeing some blossom and fruit. You know, definitely in the next 5 years, well over 50% of them should be fruiting. So that's the reason you're doing the chip budding. You could also do this as bench grafting in the winter. I prefer to do chip budding, it's much faster. It's, in my opinion, the best way of cloning a tree. But it's, you know, it's horses for courses. If you want to do it in the winter, there are reasons to do that. It's availability of scion wood. It's when you've actually got time in your calendar to do it. But the thing is, these are chip budded onto already established rootstocks, so the tree really gets going. If you bench graft, you basically have a rootstock which you know, it's got its roots, but those haven't been established, and you're putting the stress of putting a a bench graft, a whip and tongue graft basically on the rootstock. So you're planting that out. So potentially there's a few problems there already. It's never going to grow as much in the first year. These, as you know, have already been planted since March. So by the time that bud wants to grow, it's already been in the ground for a year. So the roots are quite active. They know what they're doing. You can see they're already quite healthy, these trees. So all it's going to do is grow well. So that's why I recommend chip budding. It is a slightly sort of harder task because the chips can dry out. If you're doing things in the winter, basically things aren't going to dry out. Your signwood's not going to dry out as easily, so maybe that's more forgiving. But you know, when I do this, well over sort of 95% of the apple, sometimes I'll have a row of 350 trees, and there won't be a single problem with any of the trees. Usually the problems are actually with the signwood. Some varieties are frustratingly, annoyingly, well, they just fail for some reason. One of my favourite varieties, Norfolk Royal Russet, Kingston Black also. These are popular varieties which I wish I could produce more trees of, because there is demand for them, but sometimes you get 50% or more failure for no reason. You know, I'm the same guy doing the same job. I don't know why they fail, but they do. As you can imagine, if I have nice thicker budwood, this job becomes even easier because of the match-up of the size. I'm just going to show you with the very, very thin budwood, if you don't mind, Chris, how you would also chip bud with thin budwood. So thin budwood, is it going to make too much difference? I've already cut off, imagine this was a sort of 2 meter tall tree. Is it going to make that much difference if I use the very, very thin wood at the top, or if I use it sort of 30 or so, 50 centimeters lower down? I'm going to have to say you have to use something 50 centimeters down, because this stuff or anything above that was a bit too thin to use. This looks fine in terms of the thickness. So again, it's the exact same job. This might be quite dry, I'm not sure, but there we go. So you've got your chip. You want to find somewhere a bit thinner on the tree to bud. So you wouldn't bud this at the very bottom of the tree. You do this slightly higher up. And I'm just trying to make a very thin cut on this. There you go, nice thin cut. I think I've got some tape in my pocket. So you see, you don't leave too much exposed, but straight away, if you tie that in, no more moisture's lost, no more water's getting in to rot the or to infect the tree, the wound, and there you go, job's done. Leave that alone. Now, the important thing also at this stage is, never forget, have a label. These are the typical labels that we use in the nursery, so these are all hand printed by me. very, very well, it's just using Excel. Just to explain what all this is, that's the code for the variety. So this is actually Browley's Russet, so we use a little code. 1 would signify how many trees in this batch, so there's only 1 tree, it could be up to sort of 50 or whatever. G210 is a rootstock, that's Geneva 210, which is a nice rootstock which I'm trialing. And that would be the location of the mother tree. So at this nursery, everything is recorded. We actually then would immediately record this tree. So this is the second tree in, I assume it's row 523. So immediately that would go on the computer system, as my child would say, computer system, which means that everything is very, very recorded in the nursery. Trees are then allocated to customers by number, rather than just being stock in a sort of tub somewhere, which most nurseries use. So it's very traceable nursery, which means we make very little mistakes, because these trees are not actually dug up. If this was a stock tree, this tree would not actually be dug up until basically 2-3 days before the order goes out in the winter, which is in that quiz which Chris made on ChatGPT. Apparently you can make quizzes on ChatGPT about Keeper's Nursery. Feel free to do so. But yeah, basically, yeah, we try and make everything very traceable, because if you're running a business or something, making mistakes is costly because it takes a lot of your time. So anyway, thanks for watching that video. If you have any questions about chip budding, I'd be happy to answer them, because I've got loads of expertise. grafting stuff, I can do grafting. I generally don't, because that's not what the setup is here. But it's quite a fun thing to do as well. It's a fun thing to learn both skills. I mean, grafting, there's there's not hundreds, but tens of ways of doing grafting in the winter, and it's good to learn all the different techniques. So that at any stage, if you wanted to sort of save a tree or clone a tree or basically create a family tree or whatever, you can just do anything basically. So thanks for watching. Hope everyone's having fun.